Right now, as you're reading these lines, somewhere near your house, a creature might be crawling by that can calmly withstand the bite of one of the most dangerous snakes on the continent and just keep going. Not slither away in pain, not hide and spend days recovering, but actually keep moving and finish what it started. If you've ever spotted a snake in your yard and instinctively reached for a shovel, this is the story that's worth pausing for and looking at more closely before you do anything. Stay with me until the end, because by the finish of this story, you'll understand why a kingsnake in your yard might be one of the best things keeping truly dangerous snakes away from your home, and why almost everything you've imagined about a snake versus snake fight is actually wrong. Let's start with the reputation this animal has earned. Kingsnakes are non-venomous constrictors found across almost all of North America, from dense forests to open plains to the very edges of suburbs. And their name isn't just for show, it accurately describes who they are. Just as the king cobra earned its name for hunting other snakes, the kingsnake rules its territory the same way. It hunts and eats other snakes, including some of the most dangerous venomous species on the entire continent. Depending on where you live, you might come across an eastern kingsnake, a California kingsnake, or a prairie kingsnake, each with a slightly different pattern but the same reputation. Before we go further, let's bust the biggest myth standing between you and understanding what this snake in your yard is really doing. Myth 1. A kingsnake is just another snake you need to be careful of. In reality, kingsnakes are almost entirely harmless to humans. They have no venom at all, and their entire method of overpowering prey relies purely on physical strength, not toxins. If you encounter one, the worst it's likely to do is release a sharp odor and start shaking the tip of its tail, mimicking a rattlesnake's warning even though it has no rattle of its own. It's a bluff, not a threat. Myth 2. A rattlesnake will easily win any fight against another snake. This is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Everything about how a rattlesnake behaves, how it hunts, and how it defends itself is built around venom. That's its main weapon, the very thing that makes it dangerous to almost everyone it meets, from small animals to an adult human who wanders too close by accident. But when a kingsnake and a rattlesnake meet, that weapon stops being decisive. One well-known study, published in a scientific journal on venoms, found that a kingsnake needs roughly 10 to 20 times more rattlesnake venom to die compared to an ordinary snake of similar size without that resistance. Scientists also tested blood samples from different snake species, exposing them to identical doses of venom, and found that while most snakes' blood cells broke down quickly on contact with the venom, a kingsnake's blood held up far better than almost any other potential prey animal. In other words, the rattlesnake's best weapon, the very thing that makes it the terror of the continent, barely slows a kingsnake down. Myth 3. Kingsnakes are completely immune to any venom on Earth. That's not quite true, and the real story here is actually more interesting than a simple claim of total immunity. Research shows that a kingsnake's venom resistance isn't some universal shield against every toxin on the planet, but the result of long coevolution specifically with the venomous species that live near it. For example, the eastern kingsnake shows the broadest protection against the venom of many rattlesnake species, but noticeably weaker resistance to copperhead venom, and weaker still against coral snake venom, since it rarely encounters coral snakes in the wild and almost never hunts them. At very high venom doses, or when facing venom from snakes that don't live in its native range at all, the kingsnake shows much greater vulnerability. This isn't a universal superpower, it's a precise, local adaptation, fine-tuned specifically to the threats the kingsnake has lived alongside for many generations, and weak against anything unfamiliar. If this is already changing how you look at the snake in your own yard, subscribe right now. Every week, we dig into the hidden science behind the most ordinary things in the nature around us. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen a kingsnake and mistaken it for something dangerous? Now let's talk about how this kind of hunt actually happens, because the process itself is just as impressive as the venom resistance. When a kingsnake targets a rattlesnake, it usually approaches from behind and quickly grabs its prey right behind the head. A precise grip aimed exactly at the part of the rattlesnake's body capable of delivering a venomous bite. After that, the king snake immediately begins coiling its body tighter and tighter around its opponent's body until the rattlesnake can no longer breathe. Venom resistance doesn't kill on its own here. It gives the king snake the time and confidence to finish a fight that almost no other animal would even attempt. A rattlesnake, facing almost any other predator, would rely on its bite to quickly end the confrontation in its favor. But when facing a king snake, that same bite is barely felt as an inconvenience, and this completely flips the outcome of the fight before it has truly even begun. And this isn't limited to rattlesnakes. King snakes regularly hunt copperheads, cottonmouths, and even other non-venomous constrictors, such as rat snakes, which is especially surprising since a rat snake has no venom to defend itself with at all, meaning the king snake's advantage here is built entirely on strength and grip technique. When the size difference isn't too great, a king snake usually has no trouble constricting and swallowing its prey head first, using powerful digestive juices and enzymes strong enough to break down bones, scales, and even the venom glands of its prey within a few days, extracting every bit of nutrition from it, something almost no other predator of similar size would ever risk doing. Here's something worth knowing about how a king snake actually finds its prey. Instead of relying on venom or speed, king snakes often hunt through patient ambush, waiting for an unsuspecting snake to crawl by before striking, or they actively track prey using an incredibly sharp sense of smell combined with the ability to detect body heat. It's this combination of stealth, patience, and venom resistance that lets a king snake win, again and again, against prey that would be genuinely dangerous for almost any other predator its size. The fight ends in tightened coils and total silence, and that's where a story almost no one thinks about really begins. What happens to the king snake and its place in the world after the most dangerous neighbor in the yard has been defeated? It's important to be fully honest here and tell the whole picture, not just the most dramatic part. Snakes that eat other snakes make up only part of a king snake's diet. By most estimates, roughly 1/4 of everything it eats. The rest of the time, a king snake hunts rodents, birds, small mammals, lizards, frogs, and turtles. It's even able to climb trees when it needs to reach eggs or nests full of chicks, and in those cases, it simply swallows its prey whole rather than constricting it the way it does with a larger snake. This means every king snake living in your yard is doing 2 jobs at once. It helps keep down the rodent population that almost every homeowner already wants under control, and every so often it removes exactly the kind of dangerous, venomous neighbor you'd least want to run into in the garage or by the woodpile. If you're weighing the net benefit to the nature around your home, that combination is extremely hard to match with anything bought at a hardware store. There's another important detail worth mentioning separately, because not every snake that eats other snakes uses the same trick. The eastern indigo snake and the coachwhip, for example, also hunt rattlesnakes in parts of their range, but they rely primarily on speed, size, and aggressive constriction rather than venom resistance, the way a king snake does. What makes the king snake's approach truly unique is that it doesn't need to avoid the bite entirely at all. It can take the hit and keep going, and that's a genuinely rare survival strategy in the entire animal kingdom, built specifically around the venomous neighbors it shares its territory with. Now let's step back and look at the whole picture. A king snake you may have once chased out of your yard, or worse, killed on the spot, isn't a threat competing with the animals you're actually afraid of. It's one of very few natural forces holding those very animals in check. It isn't venomous, it generally has no interest in biting a person, and it's specially adapted to neutralize the very weapon that makes rattlesnakes and other venomous species genuinely dangerous. Landowners across the country have understood this for generations, and it's partly why king snakes have earned a kind of quiet, unspoken protection in rural communities where snakes in general aren't exactly popular. Here's something really worth thinking about. For years, we've treated all snakes the same, as one single category of threat to be destroyed on sight, never once asking ourselves which snakes are genuinely dangerous and which ones are doing something a lot more like natural pest control. The king snake in your yard isn't there to threaten you. It's there to hunt rodents, occasionally take down a rattlesnake thanks to resistance built up over countless generations of living alongside it, and ask for nothing in return except to be left alone to keep doing exactly what it was doing long before your house was ever built on this land. But if we stop here, it's easy to miss something genuinely important. Why people came to fear snakes so much in the first place that they're willing to kill even the ones that are clearly helping them. The answer has a lot to do with how human fear works. We're afraid not so much of real danger as of anything unfamiliar and unknown. A snake moves silently, has no legs, no familiar facial expressions you could read intentions from, and that alone is enough to trigger very old parts of our brain into alarm long before our reasoning mind has a chance to work out what it's actually looking at. And the kingsnake pays the price for this instinctive fear just like its venomous neighbors do, even though it poses no real danger itself. There's another reason kingsnakes often get mistaken for something more dangerous. When defending itself, a kingsnake is remarkably good at mimicking rattlesnake behavior, quickly shaking the tip of its tail among dry leaves or grass, making a sound almost indistinguishable by ear from a real rattlesnake's warning. It's pure acting, a bluff perfected over centuries of evolution, designed to scare off a predator and make it back away without a single bite. But for a person who hears that sound in the grass and sees a quick movement, the difference between a bluff and a real threat isn't at all obvious in that first second. And it's usually in that very second that the fate of a harmless snake gets decided. A hand reaches for a shovel or a stick before the mind has time to ask a simple question: is this actually dangerous? What's especially interesting is that nature seems to have given the kingsnake this bluff for a reason. In places where rattlesnakes genuinely live nearby, predators and other animals have already developed caution around their warning sound. By copying that behavior, the kingsnake gets a kind of free protection without spending energy producing its own venom and without risking a real fight with a larger opponent when it doesn't have to. It's another example of just how efficiently and economically nature builds its solutions, borrowing one species' already established fears to protect an entirely different one. It's also worth mentioning how kingsnakes behave around people in everyday life, because this too is very different from the usual image of a dangerous predator. In the overwhelming majority of encounters with humans, a kingsnake chooses to flee rather than attack. It prefers to disappear into the grass, under rocks, or into the nearest burrow as quickly as possible, rather than waste energy confronting a creature many times its own size. Cases where a kingsnake actually bites a person are extremely rare and almost always happen only when someone tries to pick it up, pins it to the ground, or corners it, cutting off its last route of escape. Even then, a kingsnake bite is comparable at most to a minor scratch, unpleasant but not remotely dangerous to an adult's health. Put all of this together: no venom, a strong tendency to avoid conflict, rare and harmless bites, benefits for rodent control, and the ability to occasionally remove genuinely dangerous neighbors, and it becomes clear the kingsnake deserves very different treatment than what it usually gets. It's not an enemy to people, and it's not competing for territory in your yard. It's much more like a quiet neighbor doing its unnoticed job every single night, expecting neither thanks nor even simple recognition in return. And it's with this thought that creatures whose real role we almost never try to fully understand are constantly living right alongside us that we should move on to what's perhaps the most important question in this story. What happens when people do decide to step in and remove a kingsnake from their property, believing they're taking the right step for their own safety? The silence after one quiet predator disappears seems safe, but it's actually in that very silence that the most unexpected things start to happen. When a person kills or drives off a kingsnake from their property, it feels like they've simply gotten rid of something unpleasant and frightening. But in reality, at that moment, a small, almost invisible system of protection collapses, one that had been built up on that land long before the house was ever there. The first thing that noticeably happens is a rise in the rodent population. Mice and small rats, previously kept in check by the kingsnake, start breeding faster now that one of their main natural enemies is gone. And along with the rodents comes the next, much less obvious problem. Rodents are themselves food for far more dangerous snakes, including venomous ones. It creates a strange and frustrating paradox. By getting rid of a harmless kingsnake, a person unintentionally creates far more attractive conditions for exactly the kind of snake they were afraid of in the first place. Scientists who study interactions between species in the wild call this the vacant niche effect. When one predator is removed from a system, its role doesn't just vanish, it becomes vacant, and sooner or later someone else fills it, and there's no guarantee that someone will be safer. This is especially noticeable with kingsnakes because they were fulfilling two roles at once, keeping rodents in check and controlling the population of venomous neighbors. Removing it means removing both of those natural barriers with a single swing of a shovel. There's another detail people rarely think about. Snakes are far more territorial than people usually assume. An adult kingsnake that has settled into a particular area holds that territory for years, simply keeping competitors out, including other snakes, venomous ones included. It patrols its zone, marks it with scent, and actively defends it from intruders of its own species, and often from other snake species too. When that snake is removed, the now vacant territory tends to attract new residents fairly quickly, and there's absolutely no guarantee the next tenant will be just as harmless. Sometimes a rattlesnake or copperhead genuinely does move into the vacated spot, drawn in by the abundance of rodents and the absence of the natural competitor that used to keep it at a distance. This is exactly why wildlife specialists in some regions have spent years trying to get across one simple idea. If a kingsnake is already living near your house, the best thing you can do is nothing at all. Don't touch it. Don't try to catch it. Don't rush to call animal control. Its very presence lowers the odds of genuinely dangerous neighbors showing up far more effectively than any attempt to clear a property of every snake indiscriminately. Of course, it's important to mention reasonable caution here too, because not every snake you meet in the yard will actually turn out to be a kingsnake. Telling them apart isn't always easy at first glance, especially in the dark or with a quick movement through the grass. That's exactly why specialists advise one simple rule. If you're not sure what you're looking at, never try to get closer, pick the animal up, or chase it off with a stick. The safest approach is simply to step back to a safe distance and let the snake move away on its own, since the vast majority of snakes actively want to avoid a human encounter, and to consult local wildlife specialists if a snake has settled too close to your house and is causing concern. This isn't just the safest approach, it's also the smartest one for protecting your own property in the long run. Stepping back and thinking about this more broadly, the story of the kingsnake turns out to be less about one specific animal and more about how our whole relationship with the nature around us actually works. We're used to sorting the world into convenient categories: dangerous or safe, useful or harmful, and we usually do it at first glance, based on appearance rather than actual behavior. A snake moves silently, has none of the familiar facial expressions we rely on, and that alone is enough to trigger an ancient alarm instinct inherited from our distant ancestors. But nature is far more nuanced than our quick instinctive judgment. Sometimes the creature that looks the most frightening turns out to be exactly the one quietly protecting us from what we should actually be worried about. The kingsnake story is especially telling in this sense because it brings together several remarkable facts into one complete picture. A snake without a single drop of venom that's nonetheless capable of overpowering one of the most fearsome venomous snakes on the continent. A predator whose main strength isn't speed or toxins, but a rare blood resistance developed over countless generations of living side by side with dangerous neighbors. A creature that prefers to avoid any conflict with humans while quietly doing, every single night, a job that no trap and no product from a hardware store could ever replace. And perhaps the most important thing about this story is that it makes you think about more than just snakes. How many other creatures around us do we habitually treat as threats without ever trying to understand what they're actually doing? How many times has instinctive fear driven us to destroy something beneficial just because it looked unfamiliar or frightening? The Kingsnake is just one example among many similar stories hidden right under our noses, in our own yard, in the tree line behind the house, in an old woodpile nobody's touched in years. The next time you see a snake in your yard and feel your hand reaching for the shovel on its own, try pausing for just a few seconds. Look closer. What's in front of you might not be an enemy, but a quiet protector doing its job completely free of charge and without a single complaint, asking for only one thing in return: to be left alone to keep doing what it was already doing long before your house ever appeared on this land. If this story has changed how you'll look at the next snake in your yard, subscribe to the